What's up, strength coaches? Welcome back to another episode of the Cheeky Midweeky, where we are making strength and conditioning not boring anymore. Before we get into this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button to be notified when more content from us comes out. In today's episode, I am joined by a professional baseball coach, RJ Geyer from the Washington Nationals. In this episode, we talk about fluid periodization in baseball, the importance of breathing and the rib cage, and we also talk about how to build rapport with your athletes. So this right here, folks, is the exact reason why it's beneficial to go to events like NSCA Coaches Conference, where RJ and I met. We had never met each other until randomly during, I believe it was breakfast or lunch one morning, and just sat down and started talking shop. And you're a super sharp guy, and for working in minor league baseball for 11 years, like you got to be to stay at the top of professional sports. So thanks for coming on, and I'm excited to share about all the things that we talked about and dive into more.
Thank you for the invite. I mean, that was great. I just randomly said Friday morning breakfast before one of the things, I was like, hey, instead of sitting down by myself, hey, you guys have anybody sitting here? And you're like, no problems. Top down, and end up hour later, great conversation.
And one of the things that I wrote down when I was preparing for this was when you were talking about the foot and the knee and never going into full inversion and never going into full valgus. Talk about that, because we have a good contingent of coaches that work with baseball, whether it is at the professional level, but a majority of them are in high school. And then we have a small minority that's also in high school. So this is a topic that coaches are definitely interested in.
Yeah, and it's something that my education is always evolving, like anybody. And I always thought, hey, when you load pitching, when you load hitting, hey, you evert, you invert, you playing basketball. My background's also in basketball. And we always taught when we measure the foot, hey, check that eversion, inversion. And we have 3 joints in our foot. We got the mid-tarsal, subtalar, and ankle joint. So when I'm loading, say I'm going to hit, and if I go into full eversion, a lot of times we talk about how knee valgus is really bad for you. But where are we getting that valgus from, or that when that knee caves in, is it truly an issue with the knee, or is it coming from somewhere else, which is usually what happens when we have a dysfunction. We want to look away from it first. So if I'm going to loading up hitting, loading up pitching, and I go full eversion, that is actually indirectly driving that knee forward, where we actually want to do when we're loading hitting, we're loading pitching, or really anything in the weight room, other sports. And we have that rear foot everts, that forefoot is actually relatively inverted. It's actually separated. It's not fully moving one way. That's how we stay loaded on the backside. That's how we stay. I don't like the term rotational with athletes. I like the idea of directional rotational. When we get rotational, we fly open, whether we're a quarterback, whether we're a pitcher or hitter, we want to stay directional rotational. So we're staying towards our target. And that is what allows us to that. So now if I'm actually moving through my foot and ankle the right way, and now I still have knee valgus, I can say, hey, there is something I can look at there. Is it a hip adductor thing? Is it a glute? Is it a VMO? But it lets me look at that more directly, as opposed to if I'm just everting and if you actually fully evert your foot, you're actually going to lose you're going to put all your momentum, put all your power over your front side too early, and you lose everything. There's going to be a great energy leak.
How much of it, hearing you talk about those different muscles, is isolating versus integrating, in your opinion?
I think it's just like anything we talk about. It's not a one or the other. I think we get caught up into old school, new school, experience versus analytics and sports science, and they're both wrong and they're both right. So I think there is a time to isolate, especially if you have a muscle that is not activating. Because if we just do integrative exercises, functional exercises, is the muscle that we need to work actually truly working? So we can isolate the muscle, see is it firing, how strong it is, but even more so, great it's firing, but what's the fatigue level at? So that's great it's firing in the first quarter of a game. It's firing in spring training during the season. But do we have the endurance in the muscle so it keeps going? And that's something that is extremely tough to look at. I'm doing some work with testing out EMGs. And that might be the only way to really look at it. You're looking at a quarterback, a pitcher, a hitter, and all of a sudden they take a drastic drop. Is that because that muscle that we thought was great doesn't have any isolated endurance strength? So we do need to look at the isolation, but then obviously we need to be able to integrate that in a functional way, and more so functional, more in an athletic way.
How much of your world working in, baseball is learning from sport coaches rather than other strength and conditioning coaches, because they're the ones that maybe see? It's almost like track or swimming, where the sport coach might have a little bit more free reign in terms of talking about development power or things that are going on, because like you just said, hitting a baseball, and then you're not going to get away with being able to do medicine ball throws the same way that, like me, a football strength coach, just with my linemen, right? Like coaches aren't going to over critique and worry like a sport coach of how I'm having them do that. But you live in that different world being in baseball. So how much of your learning needs to be from sport coaches versus other strength coaches or biomechanists? Get CEUs faster, cheaper, and more convenient than ever before with Strength Coach Network. Hey, it's Justin, here to tell you about how Strength Coach Network can now help you out with our premium membership and CEUs to the NSCA and CSCCa. Upon signing up for our premium membership, you will get 2.0 or 10 CEUs immediately. That is an entire year's worth of CEUs that you are able to access from the convenience of your office. No traveling for conferences, no waiting on flights, no eating out, no expensive hotels. Just the good stuff from great coaches. Now, if you need extra CEUs for past years during the reporting period, we can bundle Fundamentals 1 or 2, which also come with 2.0 or 10 CEUs to your purchase. That way you're able to take care of your CEUs for the best price, most convenient, and learn from some of the best coaches. If you want more help with this, email us at service@strengthcoachnetwork or visit us at strengthcoachnetwork.com, and I would be delighted to help you out.
I think it's huge. I think that's what's lost. A lot of times we live in silos in our industry, that we got strength conditioning, we got sports nutrition, we got mental skills, we got sports coaches. We all live in silos, and there might be a small time to live in those silos, but for more, as they say, synergy, 1 + 1 = 3. The more we work with them, the more we learn from them, not only will it improve us, but the fact that we're willing to learn from them will open up their idea, their mind to, hey, let me learn from the strength coaches too, because I think we can make each other better. There could be things that we're teaching in the weight room that are biomechanically wrong. There could be things that we're teaching in the weight room, and we can be more A, B, C, D in the weight room, whereas a pitching coach, hitting coach with their athlete is going A, C, G. How we teach, how technical we teach in the weight room, as an athlete, you can't be that technical at times. So you talk to a sports coach, and where we need to individualize a lot, that sport coach could be saying, hey, for this particular player, this is what we need for him. And that allows us to modify what we do in the weight room a lot better.
Within the world of being a generalist versus specialist in baseball and in the weight room, how much of Bondarchuk's pyramid of GPP all the way up to the CE do you prescribe in? Do you and the people that you work with within the nationals, and I'm not asking you to give away like what you guys do, but just in terms of 10,000 foot view of that GPP all the way up to the actual competitive exercise, or any special exercises, thinking about Doc Yes's?
I think that it has a place here. I've never been a fan of, and I consider that kind of when you follow that, you consider that a protocol. And the tough thing with protocols are people adhere them too much. I think there's a general sense of, yes, you do need that general preparation. That is extremely important, and you need to work your way up that pyramid. But with that, I hate saying that everything is a case-by-case basis, but have that's your plan. But we need to look off that plan, because that could be, when we go into spring training, say for baseball, we're going in 7 days a week for 6-7 weeks. So we're going 7 days a week, and we may have a plan, Again, that general preparation. We may have a plan that say, hey, I want 2 weeks out. We're going to get into that power focus development so they're ready for day one. But all of a sudden you have two rain outs which kill everything on the field.
Ooh.
You have the double headers. You have, I remember one time we were playing the Orioles in a 6-game series. We drove in on Tuesday to Bowie, night game. Wednesday, we have an 11 a.m. game. Thursday, then we have a rain out doubleheader. Then Friday, we have an 11 a.m. game, doubleheader. Friday, we have a 1 o'clock game. And Sunday, we have a 1 o'clock game. So now everything you plan programming-wise is out that window. And we could have just come off a deload week. Now we have that. Now, and that's where the idea of protocols, I don't like to call them protocols, they're plans. But their plans, it's like I'm driving out to Florida for spring training. I have a plan. I have my GPS. But if there's an accident, there's road construction, I'm going to have to go off those plans. Kind of like our flights home. We had a plan to fly home, but we had changes to our plans on the flight home from the conference.
So how do you handle that fluid periodization of still doing a good job, right, and giving them the stressors that they need? And then how did you as the strength coach be able to be like, okay, I got to adapt? Because I know for young me that would have been hard, and we have young listeners out there. Can you speak a little bit of life into that?
Obviously, going along with the idea of having your cycles, whether a lot of times you're not even going to go out to macro, you're going to go to meso, micro cycles. But you have the plan in place. You have the alteration. You have, at least as a younger coach, you have a backup plan.
What's up, everybody? Taking a quick break from the show to talk about one of our sponsors, TeamBuildr. I've been using TeamBuildr since 2019 when I was at Towson. I still use it with my remote athletes. I also use it at Goldfinch, which is the private sector gym I train at, and we use it at Centennial, which is the high school that I'm working at. Now, if you're printing on lift cards because you say, oh, I can't afford TeamBuildr, guess what? TeamBuildr has a pre-written grant that you can locate on their website. You simply change the name of you, your organization, and the areas that they highlighted, and they can help you get TeamBuildr at your facility, your university, whatever it is, so that way you can optimize how you train your athletes with this software. Now, TeamBuildr is also a part owner in the Plyomat. The Plyomat is something that I utilize at Goldfinch, and it helps you be able to see how high somebody jumped, the ground contact time, and RSI. You can get all that conveniently right there. You can reach out to your rep from TeamBuildr to be able to get more information on the Plyomat. It's fast, it's reliable, it's convenient, and it's trusted by coaches worldwide. Check them out as well as TeamBuildr in the link down below.
As you get the more experience, you may be able to create a backup plan on the fly, but you still have a backup plan in your mind or on paper that you've done before. Number one is obviously taking advantage of today. So if I'm looking at the plan, when I look to schedule, we're home this week, we're away next week. I'm looking at next week's schedule. I'm looking at the next couple weeks' schedule to see what days are we going to have those quote unquote SpongeBob games at 11 a.m. Looking at the weather, looking at different things like that could affect us, finding out when additional staff's coming in and I may have to change my thing. So I may have a Tuesday, Wednesday where Tuesday is outfielders, catchers, Wednesday's infielders. But I know, hey, we have guys coming in to work with our infielders on Wednesday, so I'm switching everyone to Tuesday. And I like the idea, I've been playing around with it more and more, linear/undulating periodization, to where if my goal this month, I want to work on maximal strength, that's our first lift of the week. So I know that no matter what, rain, schedule, if you're working with basketball, you don't have to worry about weather. Stuff could come up with exams, and anything could come up, that I know I can get that one lift in. And that's my focus. And now my secondary focus, where it goes, this month is max strength. My second lift might be week one's max power, week two, my hypertrophy, week three, max power, week four, hypertrophy. That way I'm still always touching on everything, because knowing that, hey, if we don't touch max power for 3, 5, 7 days, we're going to start losing part of that. We can stay off max strength a little bit longer. We can stay off hypertrophy a little longer, but I want to touch all those things. I'm going to go in my warm-ups, and instead of just doing a generalized warm-ups, I'm going to phase in my plyometrics in my warm-ups. So I know I control my warm-ups, whether it's indoors, outdoors. I know I'm going to have my warm-ups before they go on the field. So I'm going to phase, hey, on Tuesday, we are going to do forward linear hops. On Wednesday is going to be recovery. On Thursday, we're going to do rotational to the right linear hops. Thursday, rotation to the left linear hops. So we're working on that rotation. We're working on that valgus stress on the ACL, but we're looking on that rotational stress because your ACL, MCL tears happen. Sometimes they happen on valgus. Sometimes they happen on that rotational stress. We're protecting the PCL also. We're working on different phases of the rotational linear. On Saturday, we might do backward hops. So we're working on the different tendon ligament stress, and what I know, we control certain things. We're always going to be doing warm-ups, so I can plan my plyometrics in there, and that takes care of times when we may not have the time in the schedule.
So within that world, and I had Coach Alan Johnson, who worked he was the first strength and conditioning coach for the Baltimore Orioles, and this was back when they had Cal Ripken on the team. And he talked about, hey, he knew the importance of getting Cal on his side, for lack of a better term, being like, hey, this strength and conditioning thing, this is important. How do you build rapport with those players that, for lack of a better term, move the needle? Players listen to what they say. Soto was in your guys' program for a while and signs these big contracts. So these players that have pull, and you want to be able to get them to understand and see the value. You're not trying to cater to them and lie to them, but you're trying to be like, hey, listen, I'm on your side. Like all the things you just said, hey, I want to be able to help understand the fluidity of training and be able to keep you healthy and keep you on the field. What have been some of your tactics and strategies to build that relationship with key stakeholders as players in your tenure over the last 10 plus years?
That's a great question. And I think for us as strength coaches, performance coaches, even skill coaches, I think that is where we earn our money. It's easy to get anybody, the guy that wants to go in the weight room, get stronger, bigger, easy to motivate that guy. It's that guy, like you talked about, that maybe doesn't want to do it, or that guy that everyone else is going to follow. How do we get to that guy? So the first thing is treating these people as absolutely as human people. They're not athletes. They're humans. They're just like us. So I'll talk to them at the beginning of the year that, hey, we have this lift schedule twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever it is. But it's also a communication side that, hey, if your family's coming into town we're on the road and they're coming into town for this 6-game series, hey, communicate with me. And you know what? I'm not going to let you go to the gym in the morning to lift. We're going to do something on the field. You need to spend time with your family.
That's awesome.
That stuff on the side is huge. Getting to know them outside the weight room. I love doing batting practice, just to walk in the outfield while they're shagging, talk to the guys. What's going on with your life? How things going? Getting to know them. I know one year, 3 of my best players, they loved Pokemon. They would argue who the Pokemon master is. So I actually learned about Pokemon to have conversations with them on our guys' rehab sheets. Whether we're rehabbing or whether we're the performance, the biggest killer of gains is 2 of the biggest killers are lack of autonomy. So letting the players have some say into this. How does this exercise feel? Hey, it doesn't feel good. Hey, what would you want to try out on that? And monotony. Rehab monotony is a killer. So what I would do with my guys, especially the long-term guys, is one of the guys was a Pokemon fan. I'd spend 30, 45 minutes every morning. I'd put Pokemon trivia on his. Another guy was a Marvel fan. Another guy's a movie quote fan. So on the rehab sheets, I'd start putting in pictures of Pokemon, movie quotes. Another guy's a hockey fan, a history fan. So put in trivia on them. That's not super hard, not super easy, something challenging. And all of a sudden, guys who aren't even rehabbing, guys who are just on the team are coming in, trying to do the trivia. Guys leave. They tell me to shoot them on Instagram, the trivia stuff for the day, or that's because they love it. And we're out stretch, which is from leading stretch is one of the most monotonous, boring things in the world. And they're just talking, they're arguing about the trivia questions during stretch. But the fact that you start showing interest in them, you buy into them as a person, they will buy almost always into you and what you want.
That is amazing. That is one of the best things that I've ever heard about a legitimate strategy to build rapport with players. And I don't think that has been talked about like that an actual way. And I hope our listeners go back and listen. It was a 3-minute masterclass on how to do it. And I hope that y'all do something similar, because you're right. The monotony, and you're removed from the team. You've lost your own identity of, hey, you're RJ, you're the baseball player, but now you got hurt. You can't go do your sport, something that you identify with. But if you can really then dive into something that you do identify with, shout out to you for that idea, because that is fantastic. Diving into the kind of X's and O's of things, like what does your world look like right now as you're working with athletes and moving up and down? Because there's an age range in baseball. You've got the young DR league, you've got these young players, sometimes older pitchers, right? How do you handle that discrepancy? Is it you and the rest of the staff, you're working on that right now during this time where they're away, but then pitchers and catchers are going to be reporting soon? Like, you got this little bit of a window here.
Yeah, like you talk about the off season, in season.
Yeah, a little bit of both. How the off season will help prepare your in season because of how long your in season is compared to the off season.
So off season's always sometimes a tough thing, and it comes down to building the rapport relationship with the players during the season. Because the off season, and I get it, but we have programs for them, but they have a lot of these guys have their off season trainers, their off season strength coaches, all-season chiropractors, all that stuff. So it's trying to create a rapport with those guys too, finding out what they're doing. Because I've learned stuff from their off-season guys that,
really,
a guy that I may not have a great rapport with, or maybe I haven't worked with him a lot, and he's this guy who's worked with them in 6 off-seasons.
What's up, everybody? Taking a quick break from the show to talk about one of our sponsors, Hawken Dynamic. I've been using Hawken Dynamics ever since I was at Towson. Still utilize it today when I'm at the private sector at Goldfinch. Even brought the plates from Goldfinch over to Centennial to do some force plate testing with the football team there. We've done force plate testing with other high school athletes. It is something that you need to get. If you want more help with it about how to practically use it, and you want to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to us at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com. Not only do I utilize it with lower body assessments, I use it with upper body assessments, plyo push-ups, prone Y assessments. You can also utilize it for what I call an upper body isometric mid-thigh pull, where essentially you're doing a push-up at the strongest range and you're pushing into an immovable force, so a barbell, same way you do an isometric mid-thigh pull. Like I said, been using them for years. Valid, reliable. The customer service is fantastic. Go check out Hawken Dynamic in the link down below, and you will not be disappointed.
He's going to know more about that player than I may know. So I learned from him, and then also create that rapport so I can pass along, hey, this is stuff that we're working on. Can we include that into their off-season programming? So it's just making sure the big key is to try to make sure that they're on the same page as us coming into the season, that they have that readiness. Because the last thing you want to do is say, hey, you have to do our program. You have to do this. Yeah, and then that's where you get pushback, and that's where you lose autonomy, whether it's a player or the guy they're training with. But if you can say, hey, dude, these 7 things you're doing are awesome. I love them. Hey, these 2 things, what are your thoughts about switching these things up? And this is the reason why. This is a reason why, not only depending on the player, research-wise, anecdotally-wise, my experience-wise, but this is how it may affect you hitting, that may affect you pitching, may help your mobility, may help your performance, and you make it a little more personal to them. And so that's going into there. And then during the season, it's really just you have that, we talked about that general plan that we want to do for them, but really getting into that individualization. But for me, the next step is creating that educational aspect of it and knowing the psychology of the player. I've had players who want to know where the muscle attachments are. Guys who exercise science majors, kinesiology majors, guys who just fascinates it. So if I don't educate them on this and the why and the how, they're going to go online. As we all know, there's some great stuff online, but there's some not so great stuff online. And there may be great stuff for Olympic lifters that have nothing to do with baseball. That's opposite what we want to do with baseball.
Yep.
And I have other guys that kind of want to know the general background. I'd say I remember one time when I started getting into baseball, I remember a veteran strength guy said, just tell them what to do. They don't explain anything to them. And I found out maybe one out of every 50 guys will just say, just tell me what to do. Almost everyone wants to know a reason for why they're behind it. And once you can explain to them and you gain that trust, they're going to come to you. They're going to respect you. If they read something online, they're going to ask you about it. But the one thing, especially with the younger coaches, I'd recommend is if you don't know something, even if you're not sure, don't BS it. Be like, hey, I don't know. And honestly, that's where some of my best learning has happened is I don't know. I'll go and ask someone else, another coach in the department, someone with another organization. I'll go on, I'll research, look up research articles. I'll look up guys like you. I'll research it. Next day or two, come back and say, this is what I learned. Let's do this. And the fact that you said, I don't know it, and then you went out and found out for them, you got that guy. That's another way you got that guy to bought into everything you're going to do.
Amen to that. And I wrote down, is there too much that happens pregame in terms of throwing and hitting? And this is a little bit loaded. I'll give you the background on it. So from reading Joe Madden's book, where he used to do Little League week, where the players wouldn't be allowed to do anything typically before a game that they do. They just show up to the game and play. Coming from the football world, where coaches and players literally with GPS devices on that I put on the players, all their extra warm-up is a full half to 3/4 of a game. So if we know this, but it could psychologically affect the athlete, how do we do exactly what you said? Give them autonomy, let them do the thing, but not let them overwork themselves to the point where it actually is potentially detrimental to their performance.
I think part of it, and it's going to depend on your sport, depend on the level, the age, the maturity of the players. So like you talked about football, playing once a week, baseball, 6 days a week, that you potentially could have a little longer warm up in football, maybe a little less basketball, less in baseball. Because if you're doing a long warm up every day in baseball, you're going to get burned out.
Yep.
And that's why you look at starting pitcher's routine is going to be way different than position guy's routine. I do think as you're coming up and as you move levels, you may have a routine in high school or college. You go in professional ball, different ball game because you're playing more, you're playing longer schedule, everything. So it's almost like you go back 2 levels and you retrain. So at the younger levels, it's about giving them a little more structure, but explaining that structure for them. And then as you move up, you take some of that structure away, you give them some autonomy, pull it back if you need to. A great example is once we get a little bit into the season, I will give my pitchers and position guys, it may be on Sunday, it might be on a Wednesday. I'll say, instead of having team stretch, I'll be like, hey, run out to center field, circle stretch, or I'll take a position player. Hey, you run the stretch. Let's see them how they do things with autonomy when they're doing themselves. Because one, it starts teaching them a structured program, but not run by me, but run by their peers. Yeah. Number 2, the most important thing we can teach our players is leadership and communication. So now we're teaching these guys leadership and communication. And it's always funny because I'll have the most boisterous player and I'll be like, hey, let's run stretch. And he's, nope, I know, I can't do it. And it's something that you can see that they're boisterous in nature, but they don't have that confidence in themselves. So have that confidence in what they do, what do well and not. And then there's repercussions. If they go out and run stretch and it's a 3-minute stretch, I'll be like, okay, you guys, we're not doing this for the next 3 weeks. But so you take away some structure, you give some autonomy, and then you have repercussions if they don't follow through on that. And as they build up and you start teaching them, and for me, for our warm-ups and for lifting, I like to try to teach like 1 or 2 activations they can carry over to the games so that they can start creating their routines that work for them.
Speaking of routines and things that have to happen, it's been pretty routine in baseball, running polls and trying to train energy systems. What, in your opinion, is the best way to do energy system development for the sport of baseball based on the different positional demands? Because some people can say, oh, baseball is this sport. If you're the catcher, it's a lot different of a sport than if you're the left fielder or the first baseman. Like, how do you handle that? Because yes, obviously the higher you go in baseball or whatever sport, you can really niche down on all the different positions. But globally speaking, energy system demands and the different positions within baseball. Taking a quick break from the show to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Powerlift. I used Powerlift when I was at Harvard, Maryland, and the University of Iowa. I was also part of the staff that had the new weight room at the University of Iowa, the 32 rack, beautiful facility. I was a part of that. I also have Powerlift's equipment nowadays. Powerlift Strong, made here in the great state of Iowa in the great country of the United States. They're able to work with you on any customizations that you need, logos, height, whatever it is, the limitations that you have. Their equipment is strong. The people there, they're very good people. Check them out in the link down below. And if you have any questions on how to work with them, reach out to us at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com, and we would be delighted to help.
And that's just finished up a fellowship program with Gary Gray and the Gray Institute. And he likes to say answers to that are yes. Yes, because everything is correct to a point. Like we do positional, we do want to individualize, but we have to also watch out for individualization because athletes a lot of times don't like to be individualized out, and it makes them actually more self-conscious, less comfortable being individualized out. That if they're like 8 guys are doing one thing and they're doing something else, they feel left out. They feel if their thing's easier, the other 8 guys are going to be like, you're not work. So we always have to look at that mental aspect, that chemistry, how the person's going to do that, what that's going to do. And if we're going to put them out to certain things, explain to them why. Because we could have 3 catchers and do 3 different conditioning drills based on their workload catching, if they're catching bullpens only, if they're the backup catcher and not doing anything. So the one thing I would say is we always have to watch out for over-individualizing things at the expense of the player feeling like they're being like pulled out as someone totally special. With that being said, that there are things that we do need to, the old school way of just running polls and running a quote unquote flush run. The idea about that is not great, but the idea of just running sprints and just running 40, 50 yards max sprints is not great either. If we're going to run the sprint protocols of how the coaches who are say, hey, you got the strength guys and the gurus who say, hey, only sprints for pitchers because it's an anaerobic activity, especially with the pitch clock now, totally different aspect. You don't have as much recovery because of the pitch clock, but it's also, we are never truly aerobic or anaerobic. So we're always using all 4 energy systems. So we do have to have aerobic training. There's a physical side to that. There's a mental side to it that you need to push through it. But we also do need a high level of, we need aerobic, we need a high level of anaerobic training because we are more of an anaerobic sport. But if you don't have the aerobic base, it goes back into how well does that endurance work with the muscle, with the body when you play day in and day out.
Yeah, and you're throwing a pitch like between wind up and delivery. Like sometimes, depending on it could be 4 seconds, and then you get the ball back and you're throwing it within 30 seconds, and you're repeating that. Let's say as a 10 pitch at bat, there's a reason that you see these pitchers sweating, especially when it's hot and the stakes are on the line in the beginning of it, and you're pitching against a really good person. So that wears on you. It's aerobic. It's anaerobic because like I said, maybe 2-second throw and you got 20 to 30-second rest, but you're doing that for 20 straight minutes. And then you have to repeat that over time. And then you have to be able to recover from that session to the next session throughout weeks and months in a season and the travel. So having a healthy aerobic system will help you do all of that better.
Exactly. And now the pitch clock now, I keep forgetting it's 18 seconds with guys on base. It's 20 seconds, something like that. So you have a lot less time now. So where we talk about the 21 ratio for full phosphate or creatine or however that ratio is, we're not getting it as a pitcher anymore. And that's if the pitcher does the full pitch clock. A lot of these guys are throwing with 3-4 seconds left on the pitch clock. Now a ball gets hit, you got to sprint back up a base, get back on the mound. So if we don't have the aerobic base, and there is still a thing to do a little bit of quote unquote distance running, as long as it's not that fat man jog. And what I like to tell players, I want you to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And by that is, hey, it's cold out, it's a little misty. I want to run indoors on a treadmill. Now we're going to go outdoors because you need to pitch in that weather. You're not going to be comfortable pitching in 40-degree weather, but I need you to be comfortable being uncomfortable in that aspect. So same thing when it's really hot out, it's 98 degrees. Yeah, I'm going to factor that into the load of the day and the recovery need. But we need to run. We need to train. We need to do things in that weather. You're going to play in that weather. So I don't want your first time doing that being in a game situation. I want you to be comfortable in that situation, knowing that you're uncomfortable, but you're still comfortable with that feeling.
That's actually fantastic. And I wrote down that the variability of throwing under not only just I started to nerd out on like the science behind it, and I looked up, okay, the pitch clock. So the pitch clock here says it's 15 seconds to throw with no one on base, 18 with runners on base. That was a reduction from 20 down to 18. Batters must be ready to hit within 7 seconds between pitches. Pitchers can step off the mound twice per plate to reset the clock, and 30 seconds to resume play between batters. So I was like, all right, nerd out, like word, let's work above and below the demands. So if you have 15 seconds on average, sure, throw some bullpens where you have 15 seconds. Throw some where you've got 10 seconds, so you have less rest, so you're working on your endurance aspect. Let's have some where you're throwing 25, 30 seconds. So maybe now you're actually throwing harder and the velocity on your arm is a little bit higher. But you took that even a step further and said, hey, let's work above and below the demands in the temperatures, because there is absolute truth to that being said. You can't just stay throwing inside because it feels good, because we both know April baseball, that ain't warm in some of those places. That ain't close to warm. That's really good. What about pitchers again? Let's stay on this with Tommy John. You don't have to dive into all the intricacies of it because we have listeners at all the different levels. What would be some really good starting points and then things for them to learn about? Because like you said, you're very knowledgeable and very experienced and well-versed and put a lot of time and effort and energy and finances, resources into your continued education. What has been some of the best literature that you found about helping out athletes with Tommy John? Because again, that is something that is the very talked about in the world and the thing that pitchers don't want to deal with.
And it is one of the most baited things out there, because you will have guys who say it's because of the high velocity. Then you'll have guys of high pitch counts, and you'll get the opposite saying, back in the day, we had velocity, not as high, but we still had velocity, and we threw every 4 days, and we're throwing 180 pitches. So I think you're like anything, the truth's going to be in the middle. But I like to, when we talked about when we were at the NSCA, I'm a big research guy. I believe in analytics and everything like that in sports science. But I think sometimes we delve into that too much. And I like to look at theory and a common sense approach at times at stuff. So for me, we have guys who are stronger, more powerful. Yes, we have more guys throwing harder. But if the work ratio of the volume's going up, the intensity's going up, guys are throwing less. So in essence, it should balance out, which it's not. We're getting more injuries.
What's up, y'all? Taking a quick break from the show to talk to you about another one of our sponsors, Vitruve. I've been utilizing Vitruve for a while now, and I absolutely love the convenience of this app. The encoder is at a price that you cannot beat compared to the competitors. Also, I don't personally like the camera apps. I've known that they continue to break down, and I really enjoy having this encoder attached directly to the bar. Vitruve does that. Not only does it do that, but it'll show me velocity loss during the set, shows me average velocity, all of it right within the app. Not only that, for the app on the individual athlete, there's a Vitruve Teams app where now, as the coach, I can see all the results from my athletes. I can API that into my TeamBuildr, and now everything that I'm trying to do, get better competition, better intent in the weight room, I am able to do with Vitruve. If you want more information about them, click the link down below, or you can ask us questions directly at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com, and we would love to answer those questions for you.
So why is that? So we talk about a lot of one sport athletes. And I think we talked a little bit this out the NSCA, but we have a lot of one sport athletes. And I don't think that's even the case. If you're throwing you around, you don't, as you grow up, you don't get recovery, you get that wear and tear, yes. But I think for me, the Tommy John epidemic is, part of it is as you're going through grade school, high school, college, having appropriate loads of acute to chronic workload, building up the threshold on those. So it's the UCL is not beat up by the time you get to college pro, but we have high school guys getting Tommy John. So where's the issue? And for me, I think it's the loss of when we're trying to throw hard. If you think about you're going to try to throw your hardest punch you do, harder than you've ever done, what are you probably going to do? You're going to tense up your body, tense up your breathing. You're going to get out of sequence, and you're going to start leading with your body too much. Arms going to trail. So now we have a lot of tension in the body, which increases stress on the joints. We have a loss of mechanics, so we have a big energy leak. We're not using our lower half and transmitting through the core to the upper half. And then we also have, if you've never boxed before and you only trained like a football player as an offensive lineman, we have a loss of athleticism in that movement. So what can we do? We can teach that ability to the high stressful situations in the weight room on how to sequence better and translate it, on how to improve the movement literacy and breathing to go into the performance. But also get guys as athletes. If they're one sport guys, especially once they go to the pros, even college, you're one sport guy. Let's, in the weight room and the movement stuff, create movements and lifts, not always similar to what we're doing, but let's get it similar to other sports. If I'm a baseball player, I may want to do a rotational lunge, have a dumbbell that comes up here, and then I may bring mine up here, bring down different neck rotations. What that's going to do is, what happens when you're at first base and you have to reach for a ball? You have to jump up against a fence. You have to dive for a ball fully extended as an infielder. We're not training that. But you get that if you play basketball, you're getting that. We're jumping up for a rebound or blocking a shot. You get that in football if you're a position guy reaching up for a pass, a defensive lineman trying to block down a pass. So let's look at how movements we do in other sports, carry those movements over to the weight room, carry those movements over to our movement prep, so that now we have some type of threshold, so that maybe we don't prevent an injury, but we create injury resiliency, or maybe that oblique strain that is an 8-week thing, now maybe it's a 2-day thing. And I've got to the idea of it's not prevention, it's resiliency of injuries and reduction of injuries that we can do.
Couldn't agree with you more. And you started talking about there with the looking thing from what we talked about with vision and neck exercises and being able to track the ball. And shout out Jeff Moyer for that and the biomechanics course that we'll be putting out later this year. But talk about that vision thing. Talk about the neck, because that's something that we both started to nerd out on the conference with.
And this is something I think it's one of those things that is overlooked a lot. I almost want to say that there's a correlation between the more boring an exercise is, the more helpful it is sometimes. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And who really wants to work on neck mobility, and I haven't tried it out, but the iron neck is something I want to try to test out with everything. But if I'm going and loading on a pitch like this, and I don't have the ability to rotate my neck to see that mid-inside pitch, what am I going to do? I'm going to get my head in a position to see it. So I have to open up my front side, which means now my front hip opens up, and now I became a rotational hitter instead of a directional rotational hitter. And now I pull off it. All we have to do is work. If we just go ahead and clean up the ability to rotate the neck, adjust it up and down, all of a sudden I don't have to open up. And now all these things that we're doing to work on front hip, back hip, shoulder, all these different drills in the weight room and skill coaches we're doing. Not saying this is the end all be all, but maybe we just fix that and it fixes 10 other things. I'm trying to throw a pitch and I'm going down and I can't see that mid inside. I'm trying to throw it middle in to lefty as a righty. I'm going to open up so I can see that target in there. So potentially beyond the concussion help and everything like that, but now all of a sudden we can see the ball better. But even we look into the mobility stability spectrum, we get that cervical mobility. Now all of a sudden we have that scapular stability as it moves. So it just, even within that, it allows us to move better. And touch it back on a little bit with the Tommy John is that if we can't move through the neck, we can't, and that affects the shoulder mobility, we can start looking at outwards. And if I'm throwing a pitch and I need to pronate on my pitch and I lose that mobility through my wrist and shoulder, I'm going to pronate it through the UCL.
Yeah.
And I've had guys that all we did was work on that wrist pronation. All of a sudden their bicep tendonitis goes away. Their stress on the UCL goes away. And so we can look at, if we can clean up that cervical movement, not only can we see better and going into that depth perception and their neurological side of depth perception of moving the head too quickly, now we can go ahead and have a smoother transition watching that ball in or seeing that target. There's less variability in your entire body, more consistency. More consistency leads to less energy leaks and less stress on the body, in my opinion.
Have you done any of the slow the game down stuff or just Brock string, like convergence, all that different type of ocular training?
Played around with it some on that stuff, but nothing. That's actually something that I want to do more of a deep dive into with that. I've had some back when I lived in Austin, a guy who did that. So I've done a little bit on that. I think there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
The tough thing is trying to, with anything, finding the time. It's not even so much finding the time, because a lot of times during the baseball day, you have that time, but there's that mental energy that everything you do during the day, even picking your clothes out in the morning, is a drain of your mental energy. So the more things we do with the guys, the more mental drain. So it's the idea is, and you've heard of habit stacking, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So I like the idea of training stacking. So what can I do to stack different training modalities? So we might I might try to do a vision drill tracking as I'm doing like a crossbody cable pull. So I'm doing a crossbody cable. I know I have my front side internal rotation problem. So I'm doing a crossbody cable pull to work on power development. But now I'm working on my left hip internal rotation, and I may have a left rotation to work on tracking, and I may track it with flipping a ball up, or, hey, putting numbers up, and you got to call out the numbers. So now I'm trying to do training stacking and get multiple elements in there instead of trying to train each one of these independently.
That's actually so our listeners out there, that if you're doing any of the Brock string stuff, like I had a wide receiver at Towson that could jump a legitimate 40 on a jump mat, could run 22 miles per hour with GPS, a fly in the low 0.90, sorry, but he couldn't catch the ball. And the coaches wanted to write him off. I'm like, listen, he's too talented at 6'5" in that wingspan. So we would pair with typically with like his B block movement. We would do, okay, we're going to work on set the beads. Hey, we're going to start close, go far, come close, do a double leg. Then we would have the chart, and we'd have one of my interns reading and say, hey, read the numbers down column 3, or hey, read them in row D, and just make him do those type of things. Again, training stacking, where sure, we might be doing bench press. He would go do the eye track, and then we would still go pair it with a mobility drill and a posterior shoulder row. So to you and our listeners out there, that's a good habit stacking way to get in some of this vision training, because you're right. It is just one more thing that gets added to the plate.
I love that idea of what you're doing with that guy, because I think we get guys written off a lot because they're great in the weight room, And we talked about Friday, there's a loss of movement literacy, and it doesn't transform onto the field.
Nope. Last question, that to be able to respect your time, but we talked about this down at coaches, but the vertical press and doing things overhead. And I loved your response about the fact that, listen, we live overhead. They need to be strong overhead. It was very relieving to hear. Can you dive into that even more?
Yeah, if you think about really almost any sport we do, we go overhead. Now, Are we going to be smart about it? Am I going to do a bar military press? No.
Max out barbell snatch.
Yeah. So I'm going to be smart with that, but we go overhead. Now, if I'm training a football wide receiver, it may be a little bit different than a baseball athlete, because baseball athletes are never putting two arms overhead. Receiver has to go two arms overhead. So we got to do something there. But if we don't train overhead, it goes back to what we talked about before on a one sport athlete. We need to train them in other movements of other sports. If we don't train these guys overhead and they're going overhead, they're going to get hurt. They're not going to know how to move that scapula. We talked about scapular stability.
Ooh, yeah.
The scapula has to be mobile as it's stable. So if we don't train overhead, we don't know how to do that. We may start firing the upper trap to fire that. And now all of a sudden we have that shoulder locked up, that cervical locked up. We need it. It's just absolutely paramount. It goes back to that idea of movement literacy, of being able to, the movement literacy we talked about that's what allows us to take the weight room into the performing side. That's a transition. And I remember at that conference, there was one of the speakers talked about, he had a question was, hey, is there what we do in the weight room or out in the track field, does it translate to what you do in the performance? And about half the people would say, no, it has no transfer. I'm like, why are you doing that drill then? It does have a direct transfer, but it transfers to something that transfers there.
Yep.
And, that overhead is, if I can do a bottoms up one arm kettlebell press, is that going to make me a better pitcher, better receiver? No. But if we can create a movement literacy movement of doing that like you did, stacking vision in that, if we can do where we do that eyes closed, or we do it reactionary movements, so that now we create, that's the movement literacy aspect of seeing, I'm doing a movement in the weight room, overhead movement, I'm doing something else, and I'm now doing it eyes closed. I'm doing it reactionary, and I'm looking at the decrement of power or strength or stability, proprioception. Now I know that there's an issue with transfer onto the field.
So the eyes closed thing, that brought me back to my notebook from the conference. Talk about that and building that movement literacy and being able to perform under less than ideal situations and mental that was awesome. Let's dive back into that.
For me, this is the one thing I'm delving into a lot, research-wise and anecdotally-wise and theoretical-wise, is I think one of the next pioneer ways that we can not only test athletes out, but we can make them better on the field is through movement literacy training. And it's the idea of, I'm just going to use two exercises that everyone knows. Say I'm trap bar deadlifting and I'm doing a broad jump. So I'm going to do a 5-rep trap bar deadlift. I'm going to do three individual broad jumps. Now, ideally, I'd have a gym wear set up to them to look at velocity. If you don't have, a lot of people, especially younger coaches, don't have access to that, you just use your eyes, see how easy they move it, how stable they move it, how far they jump. But I'm going to test you out in that. So that is your that is your power and strength in the weight room. Great. That's pretty easy to get by. But how often do we see the strongest guy in the weight room, the most explosive guy, is in great baseball or is in great football or is in great basketball, like a receiver you had, has all the skills, but why is it not transferring over? So what we're going to do now, look at them, is I'm going to have you do that same thing that day or the next day or throughout a week. I'm going to have you do that deadlift, and then I'm going to have you do the broad jump with your eyes closed. Your vision and hearing are your two biggest ability to create proprioception balance. So now I'm going to do it there, test out your power numbers, or test out how vision-wise or record how well you move. And then I'm going to do it on reactionary. It might be clapping my hands. It might be on a metronome. It's going to be some external source that you have to react to. So now that eyes closed, while we're not eyes closed in sports, a lot of times our eyes are not on the target. You're a receiver running down. Your eyes are on the quarterback. You have to make a quick adjustment on that button hook, a visual adjustment. As a hitter, guys who can hit fastballs that have problems with a slide or a curveball, now I got to make a quick visual adjustment. That carries over more to eyes closed. And then sports is all about reactionary. So now I'm going to look at what are our numbers when we did those lifts. Now, what's my decrement? What's my loss in each of those? Say my decrement, my loss of power or movement, or just visually, okay, this guy is 15% worse with my eyes closed, with his eyes closed. He's 19% worse with reactionary. Well, we know that's what is going in the weight room is probably not going to transfer over very well into it. In high school, may transfer over well because we don't see there's such a disparity between the best and the worst. But once you get to college and then pro, it's 1% of 1% that is the difference between getting cut and play and being a starter sometimes. So we have to look at that. So now that 15 to 19%, that's a big decrement. So now what do? We start training them with your eyes closed, with one eye closed, looking, doing a deadlift, looking to your right or looking to your left so you can't see what's going on, doing on a reactionary. And let's see, and then we get that decrement slower, lower, and lower. We're getting external cues, which they have to react to in performance situations. And then we get that transfer over. And we talked about at the NSCA where, for me, theoretically, a lot of this stuff comes down to creating better diaphragmatic breathing patterns. And we talked about if you're trying to punch someone really hard, or you're trying to swing a baseball bat really hard, we tense up. Have you ever seen the movie Invincible with Mark
Wahlberg? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a scene in there where they tell him, hey, look at the offensive lineman's knuckles. And when they go white, they know he's pressing into the ground. He's really coming up hard. He sees that, whereas defensive lineman, he sees that, calls an audible. But it's the idea is when you're pressing hard, you tense up, you restrict movement, and we go back to tension breathing. That's where I see a lot of decrements in performance. So we go to training stack, and I see that when we're doing a broad jump, you had a 19% decrement. I'm going to go ahead and now, with your eyes closed, I'm actually going to incorporate, the only first I'm going to incorporate is diaphragmatic breathing patterns. And the second thing will be internal mental imagery that I'm going to do so that they understand how their body works in those situations. We're going to train that, but mainly diaphragmatic breathing patterns so that under stressful situations, they can subconsciously relax a little more, create less tension. Less tension means better oxygen exchange and uptake during performance, better mental clarity, better mental focus, and for me, theoretically, would be better performance and better carryover performance out in the field.
That is something that everybody needs to go back and rewind and listen to that again, because you can go down several rabbit holes. You can do multitude of jumps, multitude of lifts where it's, ideal conditions versus less than ideal because it's eyes closed, it's reactionary. Mental toughness, as Keir, the founder of Strength Coach Network, said, it is the difference between your performance on your best day ever and then at your worst, and shortening that gap or less than ideal situations. And that is a very easy way to start to do it. And you can talk about, hey, I'm going to get the team more mentally tough, coach. And you're not going to be doing these potentially rhabdo-inducing Navy SEAL military training.
Exactly. And it's mental toughness doesn't have to be from, hey, I'm going to run you till you puke like they used to. Is you're really not getting anything out of that. Nope. And you're getting mental toughness out of punishment, which now is not going to be, there's very little carryover to the game. Whereas I want to get the mental toughness in, I want you to feel uncomfortable. And you're uncomfortable trying to do something eyes closed. You're uncomfortable waiting for someone to say go, the reaction. That's where I think that uncomfortability carries over to performance potentially.
Amen. Thank you for that. That's probably going to be one of the biggest takeaways for strength and conditioning coaches from this, in addition to everything else we talked about. I want to let you enjoy the rest of your day, but RJ, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Thank you so much for your time. It was awesome.
Thanks for watching that video. If you enjoyed it, click right here for videos just like that, and make sure you click here to subscribe to our channel. Have a great rest of your day.